The driveway stretched out before me like a ribbon of asphalt framed by neatly trimmed hedges and the occasional oak tree casting long shadows in the late morning sun. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel as I took in the neighborhood, a panorama of perfectly aligned mailboxes, pastel houses, and lawns so precise they seemed painted rather than grown. The air was warm, carrying the scent of freshly mown grass mixed with the faint aroma of coffee drifting from open windows. I could hear the low hum of a lawn mower in the distance, a rhythm that contrasted sharply with the tension coiling in my chest. I had lived here for nearly a decade, every square foot of my property memorized from the pattern of the gravel to the angle of the gate hinges, each detail a quiet assertion of ownership and care. Across the street, the sun glinted off Karen Whitmore's windshield as she sat in her Lexus, eyes narrowed, calculating, the notebook on her passenger seat open and ready. I walked slowly toward the gate, the gravel crunching softly beneath my boots, feeling the subtle vibrations travel up my legs, a sensory reminder of the space I had built, maintained, and protected. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant bark of a neighbor's dog and the faint scent of ozone from a car charging station nearby. Every step was deliberate, measured, a silent assertion of presence that Karen could not misinterpret without forcing her own imagination. My mind traced the layout of the property, the measurements, the boundary markers, each one as familiar as the lines of my own hand, and I felt a quiet confidence settle in my chest. I approached the mailbox, checking that the flag was down, noting the tiny scuff on the edge of the wood that had been there since last autumn, a minor imperfection that told a story of everyday life, maintenance, and respect for the property. I could hear Karen speaking now, her voice raised but distant, muffled slightly by the distance and the windows of the Lexus. She thought she was asserting authority, but in my mind, her words were just another layer of noise, easily filtered out by the rhythm of routine, experience, and quiet expertise. I glanced at the surveillance camera perched above the garage, its lens reflecting the sun, capturing the movement, the shadows, the subtle shifts in posture, and I knew that every small detail of this morning would be recorded, cataloged, and ready for review. The metallic click of the gate as I adjusted its position was sharp, precise, a controlled sound that cut through the ambient noise and anchored the space in the certainty of my control. Across the street, Karen's expression flickered for a moment, uncertainty passing over her carefully maintained composure, and I sensed the subtle shift, the recognition that the simple act of standing in the right place, knowing the facts, and moving with confidence could alter the dynamic completely. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation, the smell of mulch and gravel sharp, the warmth of the sun highlighting every edge, every contour, every familiar surface I had tended to over the years. I could hear the distant whir of traffic, a lone car passing by, the faint creak of a swing in a neighbor's yard, and the subtle rustle of leaves in the trees. Each sound layered on top of the other, a tapestry of suburban life that contrasted with the intensity of the moment, reminding me that patience, observation, and the quiet application of knowledge were far more powerful than any rushed action or raised voice. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs with the faint scent of resin from the pine trees and the metallic tang of the gate, and felt a calm resolve settle over me. The sun glinted off my watch as I checked the time, noting the subtle change in shadow, the slow movement of the day, the certainty that every small, deliberate action I took was preparing the stage for what would come next. Karen Whitmore shifted in her seat, tapping her pen against the dashboard with that rhythmic insistence that suggested she was cataloging every perceived misstep, every imagined violation, unaware that I was watching, noting, and calculating with the same meticulous care that guided my entire career. The sun had climbed higher, light spilling across the drive, glinting off the polished surfaces of her Lexus, reflecting her careful maintenance and equally carefully curated sense of superiority. My own shadow stretched along the gravel, grounding me in the space I knew intimately, every inch of my driveway, every crack in the asphalt, familiar to the smallest detail, each one a testament to years of attention and care. I stepped lightly toward the gate, fingers brushing the iron with a tactile awareness that sent subtle vibrations up my arm, the cool metal a contrast to the warm air that carried the mingled scents of spring blossoms and freshly cut grass from the yards around. Across the street, Karen adjusted her notebook, the pages fluttering slightly in the breeze, her eyes narrowing as she followed my movements, believing she controlled the narrative simply because she had the phone pressed against her ear and the attention of a few neighbors peeking through blinds. The hum of a passing car mingled with the faint chirp of cicadas in the trees lining the street, a suburban soundtrack that framed the tension unfolding, each sound layering with the crunch of gravel under my boots, the faint metallic click of the gate hinge as I shifted it slightly, just enough to remind the space that ownership is both a matter of law and presence. I paused at the mailbox, noting the angle of the flag, the slight tilt of the post, the shadows that shifted as the day progressed, all small details that seemed inconsequential until you were being watched and judged by someone who believed the rules of civility applied only to others. My breathing was steady, a controlled rhythm that matched the slow sway of branches overhead, the faint rustle of leaves punctuating the occasional distant bark of a dog. Karen's voice rose and fell, her words barely carrying across the 30 feet that separated us. But I could feel the cadence, the implied urgency, the insistence that authority lay in her calls and her proclamations, not in the facts of ownership, history, or law. I adjusted the gate one more time, the metal sliding smoothly against the catch, and felt the subtle reinforcement of control that only comes from intimate knowledge of a place and a role, the quiet authority that does not shout but simply exists, firm and undeniable. The camera above the garage caught every movement, the lens reflecting the sunlight, ready to capture the small, telling details of posture, hesitation, and reaction. Each element, from the angle of a footstep to the slight tilt of a head, was part of a larger understanding, a network of observation and patience, the kind that turns anticipation into strategy. The air carried a faint ozone tang from a nearby electric vehicle, merging with the earthy smell of gravel and mulch, a sensory reminder of the suburban ecosystem in which this small confrontation unfolded. I took another measured step, listening to the soft click of the gate, feeling the warmth of the sun on my back, knowing that every detail, every breath, and every slight movement was both an assertion of presence and a preparation for what was to come. Karen's eyes flicked toward the surveillance camera, her brow tightening for the briefest instant, just enough to betray a sliver of doubt, the recognition that she might have underestimated not just the neighbor in front of her, but the law and authority that quietly informed every step I took. The gravel underfoot shifted softly, settling. The rustle of leaves continued, and I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that patience, observation, and a calm assertion of knowledge often speak louder than any rushed command. The subtle tension of the morning held in suspension as I adjusted the gate slightly, the soft metallic click resonating across the quiet street, harmonizing with the distant hum of a lawn mower and the gentle rustle of leaves above. Each movement was deliberate, a silent assertion that every inch of this property was observed, measured, and maintained with care. My eyes swept across the driveway, noting the shadows cast by the maple trees lining the edge, the dappled sunlight catching the curves of the asphalt and glinting faintly off the edge of my Jeep. Across the street, Karen Whitmore leaned slightly forward in her seat, notebook in hand, the subtle furrow of her brow betraying her attempt to maintain authority while calculating every detail of my actions. The air carried the scent of cut grass, mixed with faint traces of the nearby bakery where fresh bread and roasted coffee mingled with the crisp morning air, creating a sensory backdrop that contrasted sharply with the intensity of the situation. I stepped lightly along the gravel, each crunch a controlled punctuation, grounding me in the space I had stewarded for years, reinforcing ownership not just by law but by familiarity and care. The mailbox stood perfectly aligned with the curb, its flag down, a small but significant marker of order and attention, and I ran my hand lightly over the smooth surface, noting the tiny imperfections that told the story of a place lived in and maintained. Karen's gaze shifted, tracking my movement with a calculated precision, unaware that every detail she attempted to record had already been cataloged in my mind, each gesture, tilt of the head, and breath measured and noted. The breeze carried faint scents of resin and warm asphalt, mingling with the aroma of jasmine from a neighbor's front yard, layering the suburban soundscape with subtle sensory cues. I paused at the edge of the driveway, inhaling deeply, letting the warm air fill my lungs, grounding myself in the rhythm of the day, the measured cadence of the neighborhood, the subtle vibrations of passing cars on the asphalt, the distant drone of a lawn sprinkler, and the faint hum of a distant electric vehicle charging. My hand rested on the gate, feeling the cool metal and the slight resistance of the hinges, a tactile confirmation of control, a quiet declaration that presence and knowledge can speak as loudly as any raised voice. Karen shifted again, adjusting her notebook, flipping a page with a deliberate precision that betrayed her growing unease. The realization slowly dawning that the person standing in the driveway was not merely a neighbor, but someone whose authority extended beyond observation, someone whose calm and measured presence carried the weight of law and experience. The subtle warmth of the sun shifted as the day progressed, illuminating the edges of the driveway, highlighting the texture of gravel and concrete, reinforcing the tangible reality of ownership and careful attention. The surveillance camera above the garage caught each movement, reflecting the sunlight and recording the interplay of action and reaction, every tilt of a head, every step, every glance, a silent witness to the unfolding dynamic. I exhaled slowly, the air carrying faint traces of pollen and cut grass, a reminder that the smallest sensory details can anchor awareness, sharpen perception, and maintain clarity in a situation where appearances might be deceiving. I could hear the distant bark of a dog, the faint click of a neighbor's gate, the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze, each sound reinforcing the rhythm of ordinary life against the backdrop of an extraordinary assertion of quiet authority. Every gesture, every slight movement, every inhalation and exhalation contributed to a layered awareness, the subtle balance of observation, preparation, and presence shaping the unfolding narrative with precision and patience. The sound of Karen Whitmore's voice crackled faintly through the phone as she continued her call, a rhythm of urgency and indignation that contrasted sharply with the calm certainty I felt standing on my own driveway. The sun had shifted slightly, illuminating the edges of the iron gate, casting long shadows across the asphalt, highlighting every pebble, every subtle dip, every mark that told the story of years spent tending this property. My eyes followed the slight tremor in her hands as she gestured wildly, unaware that I was cataloging each movement, each inflection, each minor detail that revealed more about her temperament than any words could convey. I stepped deliberately along the gravel, the crunch underfoot precise and steady, a sensory metronome that mirrored the rhythm of thought running through my mind, the quiet assurance of knowledge, authority, and preparation. Across the street, her Lexus gleamed in the sunlight, its pristine surface reflecting the blue sky, the neighboring houses, and the meticulous lines of my own property, a silent witness to the unfolding dynamic. I glanced at the surveillance camera above the garage, noting the angle of the lens, the way it captured shadows, movement, and light, understanding that each frame would tell the story of composure, awareness, and the subtle assertion of authority. The air was warm, carrying with it faint hints of mulch, freshly cut grass, and the occasional whiff of roasted coffee from a neighbor preparing for the morning, each scent grounding the moment in ordinary life, while extraordinary tension simmered quietly within it. I moved closer to the gate, fingers brushing the cool metal, feeling the slight resistance of the hinge, the tactile feedback confirming control and presence. Karen's gaze shifted, meeting mine for the briefest instant, uncertainty flickering through her expression, a recognition that the space, the moment, and the understanding of rights and responsibilities were firmly in my domain. The distant hum of a passing car blended with the soft rustle of leaves in the oaks, punctuated occasionally by the bark of a neighbor's dog, a symphony of suburban life contrasting with the intensity of this private interaction. I noted the sunlight glinting off the mailbox flag, the subtle tilts in the posts, the patterns of shadows across the gravel, all details that reinforced the sense of presence, ownership, and quiet command. Karen's pen tapped lightly against the notebook, a metronome of imagined control that belied the reality she was unaware of. That every movement, every gesture, every breath she took was catalogued, assessed, and anticipated. The breeze shifted, carrying a faint metallic tang from the Jeep, mixing with the earthy aroma of gravel and mulch, a sensory reminder that this space, cultivated and maintained with care, was under my watchful eye. I inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of the sun on my shoulders, the subtle vibration of the ground underfoot, and the steady rhythm of my own pulse as a measure of calm authority. Every detail, from the slight sway of a branch to the shimmer of light across the driveway, contributed to a layered awareness that would guide the next steps, a balance of observation, patience, and the quiet assertion of presence that would define the unfolding morning. As I paused at the edge of the driveway, the sunlight shifting across the asphalt and reflecting off the iron gate, I could feel the subtle tension in the air like static, a quiet anticipation that seemed to ripple through the leaves overhead. Every detail mattered in this space I had maintained for years, from the slight imperfections in the gravel to the angle of the mailbox flag, each small marker reinforcing the rhythm of ownership and care. Karen Whitmore, perched in her Lexus, tapped her pen against the notebook again, the sound sharp and deliberate, a self-imposed cadence meant to demonstrate authority, yet revealing more about her urgency than any words could convey. The breeze carried the faint scent of fresh mulch and the earthy aroma of gravel, mingling with the subtle metallic tang from the Jeep, a sensory landscape that grounded me while every movement, every breath, every glance was being observed. I shifted slightly, feeling the cool iron of the gate under my fingers, the slight resistance in the hinges confirming the tactile presence of control, a quiet assertion of knowledge and familiarity with the property. Across the street, Karen's eyes flicked toward the camera above my garage, her composure briefly faltering, a momentary crack that revealed her realization that authority is not always visible and that her attempts to assert it were limited by her understanding. The distant hum of a lawn mower, the soft rustle of leaves, the occasional chirp of a bird, and the faint vibration of passing cars underfoot layered together, forming a suburban symphony that contrasted with the focused awareness required for what was unfolding. I took a measured step forward, noting the way sunlight glinted off the edge of the asphalt, the subtle shadows shifting across the driveway, every detail a part of the larger picture, each movement rehearsed and deliberate, reflecting the care, attention, and experience that had shaped this space over time. Karen's pen stopped its tapping for a moment as she leaned forward, eyes narrowing, lips pressed together, her posture betraying a mix of calculation and unease, the first hints of acknowledgment that she was not fully in control. I could hear the faint hum of an electric vehicle charging nearby, the distant bark of a dog, the occasional creak of a neighbor's gate, each sound adding depth and texture to the morning, sharpening the contrast between ordinary life and the unfolding assertion of authority. My hand rested lightly on the Jeep, feeling the smooth, cool metal, the faint vibrations through the tires, the solid presence beneath my fingers grounding me, reminding me of the connection between knowledge, preparation, and the quiet but undeniable power that comes with experience. The shadows shifted slowly, sunlight catching the edges of the gate, the driveway, and the Jeep in golden highlights, emphasizing the physical reality of space, of control, of carefully maintained boundaries. Each inhalation of the crisp morning air carried scents that layered with awareness, alertness, and attention, reinforcing that the details, the observation, and the patient assertion of presence were more powerful than any loud pronouncement. I exhaled slowly, letting the warmth of the sun and the layered sense of the neighborhood fill my senses, maintaining composure, letting every detail, every sound, every visual cue guide the timing, the movement, and the understanding of what needed to happen next in this carefully balanced morning. I took a slow step back from the gate, letting my hand linger on the cool iron as my eyes scanned the street, cataloging every movement, every small adjustment Karen made, and every subtle reaction that hinted at her growing uncertainty. The sunlight had shifted again, now illuminating the tops of the hedges lining my property, casting long, slender shadows across the gravel, highlighting every imperfection and every meticulously maintained detail, a testament to years of care and attention. The distant hum of a car engine passed by, a soft undercurrent to the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a bird in the oaks above. A rhythm that underscored the contrast between ordinary suburban life and the deliberate assertion of authority unfolding quietly in the middle of my driveway. I adjusted the gate slightly, the click of the latch precise and crisp, a sound that carried subtly across the street, reaching Karen without a word, signaling control and preparedness. My gaze shifted to the mailbox, the flag still down, the wood smooth under my fingertips, a detail that had become familiar over countless days. Each scuff, scratch, and polish a silent chronicle of routine, presence, and ownership. Karen leaned forward, pen tapping lightly against the notebook again, the rhythm almost musical in its insistence, her eyes darting to my movements and back to the phone, a careful choreography of assumed authority that I had anticipated and allowed to unfold. The scent of freshly mown grass drifted in the warm air, mixing with the faint ozone tang from a nearby charging station, the combination grounding the moment in sensory reality while the tension between observation and expectation thickened subtly. I took another measured step, boots crunching softly on the gravel, feeling the vibrations beneath my feet, a tactile reminder of the tangible assertion of space and care. Each detail, the gleam of sunlight on the Jeep, the shadow angles across the driveway, the subtle tilts in Karen's posture, the slight sway of branches overhead, formed a map of presence, authority, and careful observation, all preparing for the moment when quiet patience would transform into decisive clarity. I noted the shifting reflections on the gate, the interplay of light and shadow on the iron bars, the soft gleam of the asphalt under the sun, each element a part of the intricate landscape that defined both ownership and expectation. Karen's eyes met mine for a fleeting second, uncertainty flickering, a subtle acknowledgment that she had perhaps underestimated the depth of knowledge, preparation, and authority I carried quietly with every step. The air felt electric, warm and still, carrying the faint sense of the neighborhood, the mulch, the fresh-cut grass, the distant coffee roasting, all framing the moment with a quiet intensity. My hands rested lightly on the Jeep hood, feeling the solid, cool metal, a grounding presence that mirrored the steadiness of my thoughts, the quiet certainty that every small, deliberate action would lead naturally to clarity, resolution, and the inevitable assertion of rightful authority. Every detail of sound, sight, and tactile sensation had been cataloged, anticipated, and integrated into a careful rhythm of observation, patience, and readiness, the kind of rhythm that turns ordinary mornings into moments where preparation meets opportunity with unmistakable precision. The morning air seemed to still around me as I straightened, feeling the subtle weight of authority settle naturally in my posture, a presence that did not shout, but radiated through measured steps and attentive observation. Karen Whitmore froze in her seat, the pen in her hand hovering midair, the notebook momentarily forgotten as her gaze tracked mine across the driveway, the sunlight glinting off the iron gate and bouncing faintly across the polished hood of my Jeep. The rustle of leaves overhead and the distant hum of a lawn mower filled the spaces between us, a suburban symphony that underscored the tension while grounding the scene in the ordinary rhythms of daily life. I moved deliberately, each step along the gravel producing a soft, crisp crunch that echoed slightly, a tactile punctuation in the subtle orchestration of presence, control, and expectation. The air carried the faint sense of cut grass and mulch, mingling with the warm metallic tang from the Jeep, creating an environment dense with sensory cues, each reinforcing the awareness that authority and preparation were quietly present in every movement and glance. I let my hand rest lightly on the gate, feeling the cool metal and the precise tension in the hinges, a tactile confirmation that each boundary, each inch of this property, was both observed and protected. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing slightly, the first undeniable flicker of recognition crossing her face, a silent acknowledgment that the assumptions she carried about control, power, and procedure were being quietly challenged by the measured confidence I held. I glanced at the surveillance camera above the garage, noting the reflection of light on the lens, aware that every subtle movement, every gesture, every fleeting expression was being captured, adding to the careful record of observation, awareness, and preparedness that would shape the next moments. The sun climbed steadily, warming my shoulders, highlighting the texture of the asphalt, the gravel, the subtle imperfections that marked years of care and attention, each detail reinforcing the tangible reality of ownership and the invisible authority that accompanies thorough knowledge and deliberate action. I shifted my weight slightly, inhaling deeply, letting the scents of the neighborhood, the mulch, the freshly cut grass, the faint aroma from a distant bakery, fill my senses, anchoring me in the clarity of perception and the patient assurance that comes from knowing every inch, every nuance of a space one has maintained. Karen's hand trembled just slightly as she adjusted her notebook, the subtle movement betraying the pressure building in recognition of an authority she had not anticipated, the first quiet signals that her assumptions about control were beginning to unravel. The shadows shifted across the driveway, sunlight glinting along the edges of the gate, the Jeep, and the mailbox, each visual element reinforcing the structure, rhythm, and clarity that had been quietly building through observation, preparation, and measured presence. Every step, every breath, every glance and tactile sensation contributed to a layered understanding of timing, expectation, and control, a carefully balanced orchestration where patience met opportunity and quiet authority prepared to transform tension into clarity, ensuring that the unfolding moments would resolve with precision, composure, and unmistakable assertion of rightful presence. The street seemed to exhale with the subtle shift of wind as I took a final step back from the gate, feeling the warm sunlight settle across my shoulders and the textured surface of the gravel under my boots. Each element of the driveway, from the meticulously aligned mailbox to the faint scuff marks along the asphalt, carried a quiet narrative of care, presence, and authority, one that Karen Whitmore could observe but not alter. I noted the subtle movement of leaves overhead, the gentle sway of the branches, the distant hum of a passing car, and the occasional chirp of a bird, all woven together in a suburban symphony that contrasted with the focused intensity of our interaction. Karen sat frozen in her Lexus, notebook open, pen poised yet forgotten, eyes wide with the dawning realization that the ordinary assumptions she carried about control and power were being quietly dismantled by knowledge, preparation, and patient authority. I adjusted the gate slightly, the metallic click precise and deliberate, a soft sound that carried across the driveway like a punctuation mark, underscoring the physical and legal boundaries I maintained. The faint metallic tang from the Jeep blended with the earthy aroma of mulch and cut grass, layering the morning with sensory details that reinforced presence, awareness, and readiness. I allowed a small smile to pass unnoticed, a subtle acknowledgment of the shift. In the atmosphere, the quiet tipping point where observation, patience, and preparation converged into clarity. The sunlight glinted off the gate and Jeep hood, reflecting across the driveway and onto the iron rails, highlighting the textures, shadows, and angles that defined the space I had long cultivated and safeguarded. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her posture stiffening as she slowly recognized that authority was not a matter of voice or phone calls, but of knowledge, patience, and deliberate action. I inhaled the warm air deeply, the sense of neighborhood life, freshly cut grass, mulch, faint hints of brewing coffee, filling my senses and reinforcing the rhythm of the morning, the calm, yet unmistakable assertion of presence. The camera above the garage captured the subtle interplay of light, shadow, and movement, a silent record of awareness and the careful orchestration of timing that had been building through every measured step, glance, and tactile sensation. I let my gaze sweep across the driveway, the hedge lines, and the tops of the oaks, taking in every shadow, every angle, every detail that formed a complete map of the environment and the control I quietly held. Karen shifted slightly, a barely perceptible movement, her eyes flicking to the camera and back to me, the briefest acknowledgement that the assumptions she had relied upon were no longer sufficient. The subtle warmth of the sun and the layered textures of scent, sound, and light created a moment of quiet tension, a perfect backdrop for the clarity, resolution, and unmistakable authority that had been patiently asserted, transforming the ordinary morning into a moment where preparation, observation, and knowledge converged to shape the outcome without force, without haste, and with complete precision. The driveway settled into quiet stillness as I let my weight shift slightly, feeling the firmness of the gravel beneath my boots and the gentle warmth of sunlight on my shoulders. The air carried the mingled scents of cut grass, mulch, and a faint whiff of motor oil from the Jeep, a sensory tapestry grounding the moment, while every detail of the space remained under my attentive observation. Karen Whitmore sat rigid in her Lexus, notebook forgotten on the passenger seat, eyes following my every movement with attention that betrayed the unraveling confidence she had assumed she held. The shadows stretched long across the asphalt, highlighting the subtle dips and cracks, the careful alignments of hedge lines and mailbox posts, each small element reinforcing the deliberate rhythm of maintenance, presence, and ownership that defined this space. I adjusted the gate again, a slow, precise motion, the metallic click echoing faintly, a sound that carried weight without volume, signaling control in a language of deliberate action rather than words. The distant hum of a lawn mower and the occasional chirp of birds filled the background, layering ordinary suburban life over the quiet intensity of the interaction, reminding that authority can be exerted without haste, with clarity, and with patience. I took a slow step toward the edge of the driveway, hands lightly brushing the Jeep hood, feeling the solid metal, the subtle vibrations through the tires, a tactile reminder of the connection between care, experience, and quiet command. Karen shifted slightly, the briefest flicker of uncertainty crossing her features, her lips pressing into a thin line, acknowledging in the smallest way that assumptions about control and authority were being quietly challenged by presence, knowledge, and preparation. The surveillance camera above the garage reflected the sunlight, capturing subtle movements, shifts in posture, and the interplay of light and shadow across the driveway and gate, silently documenting the layers of observation and readiness that had built over the morning. I inhaled deeply, the warm air carrying the faint scent of nearby jasmine, the earthy tang of gravel, and the soft warmth of the sun, each sensation reinforcing focus, patience, and the quiet assurance of command. The Jeep's surface glinted in the sunlight, the gate stood firm, and the shadows played across every angle with a precision that emphasized the deliberate care taken in shaping and maintaining this space. Karen's hand twitched toward the pen again, but the pause, the hesitation, and the flicker of her eyes toward the camera indicated the first clear acknowledgement that authority in this situation was not claimed by volume, phone calls, or perception, but by knowledge, presence, and deliberate, measured action. I felt the subtle shift in energy, the quiet tension easing into clarity, the rhythm of the morning moving toward resolution, as every small detail, the crunch of gravel, the shimmer of light, the warmth of the sun, the scents and sounds of the neighborhood, wove together into a pattern of calm authority, observation, and patient preparation that set the stage for the inevitable moment when control, clarity, and lawful presence would fully assert themselves without a single raised voice.